from the New Arts and Media Studios in Milwaukee. I'm Charles Bursell. This is The Log. We've got a rare lineup here. The weekend, starting with Friday the 13th, then Valentine's Day, followed by President's Day on Monday the 16th. I didn't knock myself out too much, but I did do a little research, the kind you do from your own laptop. And I couldn't find any other cases where this has happened. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is pretty rare. We have a triad here. Friday the 13th, then February 14th, Valentine's Day, Monday the 16th, President's Day. 3 holidays. Well, I guess they're not officially holidays. Friday the 13th isn't officially a holiday, but still, I found it interesting, at least a little bit, that they all lined up. Experts can't quite decide on the origins of Friday the 13th. There are several popular theories. 13 being an unlucky number because 12 is just so damned superior. It's a significant number in science. Early mathematics was based on multiples of 12 for measuring time and angles. That's why we've got the 12-hour clock, the 12-month calendar, 12 zodiac signs, 12 lunar months, 12 tribes of Israel, 12 apostles of Jesus. Even the Norse myths had 12 gods before the trickster Loki showed up to wreak havoc. So I guess that's what lots of reasons for 13 to be the unlucky number, because it comes in and messes everything up for 12. And I don't know what's unlucky about Fridays. I thought we all loved Fridays. Well, Friday, I guess, has more contemporary meanings. Once the Industrial Revolution takes off, once labor fights and dies for the 40-hour work week and wins us the weekend. Always worth a reminder to the young folks out there that people died for the weekend. So I don't know why Friday would be equated with bad luck. Friday's the best day of the week, especially Friday at 5 o'clock or whenever you get home from your commute. Then Valentine's Day, again, like most of our holidays, or all of them, pagan origins, back to Roman fertility festivals, things like that. Cupid started as Eros, of course, the handsome Greek god who wielded love arrows. It was the Romans who later turned him into a chubby little baby. And of course, February 14th is the anniversary of the 1929 Chicago Massacre. Gangsters on Chicago's North Side. Historians link to Al Capone. They're not 100% sure. My grandfather chased Al Capone in the North Woods of Wisconsin. Yeah, Capone and his gang spent a lot of time in Wisconsin. That's where they'd lay low. They'd find a little cabin out in the woods and chill out for a while. And my grandfather was, for a time, the local sheriff. I forget which county. He was also a lumberjack and a saloon owner. A bit of a Renaissance man in his time. I never met him, but I heard stories that were likely exaggerated. So we got Friday the 13th, we got Valentine's Day, then we have President's Day, which I learned for the first time. I didn't know this was the case. Did you know there's actually no such thing as a federal holiday called President's Day? No. When they moved Washington's birthday to the third Monday in February, up until then, it was recognized as a federal holiday on February 22nd. Up until I'm looking at my notes here. The Uniform Monday Holiday Act was 1968. Became effective in 1971. And it kept the legal name, Washington's birthday. And as far as I can tell, again, my crack research team, that's what it still is. The term President's Day just grew out of popular usage, advertising. Now, some states and local governments do use the name President's Day, but as far as the feds are concerned, no, it's just Washington's birthday. See, I don't like the idea of President's Day. Why would we celebrate presidents? There are very few who deserve a day. Some people get a day. MLK gets a day. Washington gets a day. But all the presidents? Yeah, after the revolution, let's rename it something like Try to Be a Good Example Day. Because after the anarchist revolution, we're not going to have all these ridiculous so-called leaders with all their ridiculous titles. We're going to have a lateral distribution of power and we're going to have a true democracy for the first time. And we can scrap President's Day. We'll keep it as a holiday because holidays are fun, and we'll make it be a good example of civic participation day. All right, let's, why are we together here? Let's look at some news. Well, we got to mention Senator Mark Kelly and the Democratic Six with big wins. Department of Justice and Secretary of War Crimes Pete Hegseth take the losses. Referring, of course, to Pete Hegseth's disciplinary measures against military veteran Senator Mark Kelly, threatening to reduce him in rank and withhold his pension and things like that. Disciplinary measures because of his role with the Democratic Six in reminding active service members that it's both their right and their duty to refuse unlawful orders. For example, and they didn't mention this in their ad that caused all the hubbub, but of course using military assets to murder people in small boats off the coast of Venezuela, well, that might be an unlawful order. You don't have to be a legal expert, a military lawyer, a JAG officer to know that. Yeah. People murdered in cold blood with no evidence, no due process, no nothing. As we mentioned with Pam Bondi and the heads of ICE and CBP, they're going to see their day in court. They don't care much about due process. They're going to be afforded all of their due process. And if there's any justice in this world, they're going to be behind bars. DOJ also failed to convince a grand jury to indict all 6 of the Democrats who took part in that video. And as you may know, if you follow this sort of thing on the news at all, the standard for getting an indictment from a grand jury is very low. It's just probable cause. There's no beyond a reasonable doubt standard. Is there yeah, maybe they could have broken the law. I guess it's possible. That's all you need. That's the standard for getting an indictment from a grand jury. And they couldn't even get that. And this is not the first time. There have been several cases where they've failed to get a grand jury to go along with their little fascist games of prosecuting political opponents. And there's just no blowback. When is there going to be charges brought against them for this abuse of power? Aren't there laws about frivolous lawsuits, frivolous prosecutions? Lawyers need to be stripped of their credentials, especially public officials. If you're a U.S. prosecutor, someone like Jeanine Pirro, people who bring these ridiculous cases. Well, someday. In the not-so-good news category, they finally did it, the EPA. They've been promising this for a while. The civilians in the EPA, under order from their oligarch overlords, have overruled basic science and revoked the scientific finding that, according to this AP headline, that underpinned U.S. fight against climate change. The regime revoked a scientific finding that long has been the central basis for U.S. action to regulate greenhouse gas emissions and fight climate change, the most aggressive move by the regime to roll back climate regulations. The rule finalized by EPA rescinds a 2009 government declaration known as the endangerment finding that determined that carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases endanger public health and welfare. This is how just demented the regime is, and specifically the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, which now sees as its mission to do the exact opposite in the name of profits. So it's as simple as that. Carbon dioxide, other greenhouse gases found by scientists to endanger public health and welfare. Fascist bureaucrats in service to the oligarchs say, no, we'll just decide that's not true. And then covered by news media as a major announcement, but I'm not so sure. On Thursday, Border Czar Tom Homan announced that Operation Metro Surge will be coming to an end in Minneapolis. And many are taking that as great news. And of course, you have to, especially you have to take this moment to tip your hat, get on your knees, and thank the people of Minneapolis. They did heroic work. But the problem, of course, is these 3,000 agents that they're drawing down, Well, they're not just going to disappear into thin air. They're going somewhere. We've already been learning over the last couple of weeks that they've been deployed more to the suburbs, to the surrounding rural counties, even into western and central Wisconsin. So as much as I want to praise the people of the Twin Cities, and I do, it's pure propaganda. It's tactics. I've mentioned Lee Stedman a couple of times. I've been following his reports from the Twin Cities. According to Lee, they're adapting. ICE agents are noticeably less male and white. They're filtering in more women agents, more agents of color. They're using less camo. They're disguising themselves in all sorts of ways. Utility workers, just normal folks on the street. So this move, this announcement, I don't trust at all. They're not de-escalating anything except their own bad publicity. And they're trying to fool the Democrats in Washington in order to get this funding for DHS. They're just, they're not dumb. They're learning, they're adapting, they're spreading out. They're sending their agents where they think there will be fewer observers with phones. So all this means really is we have to be all that more vigilant. Find your local organizers, get your training, sign up for a shift, even and especially in the burbs, in small and rural towns. Yeah, their white supremacist project is not over. They take this opportunity to brag about crime statistics, which I have to mention just for a moment because, they're just lies. I'm looking at a graph right now, a bar graph, that shows violent crime peaked in 2021, and it's been going down steadily since, which is all through the Biden administration. It went up under the first orange regime, crime rates did. It peaked in Biden's first year in office, and then it went down in 22. It went down substantially in 23, even more substantially in 24, and the trend continued into the first year of the second orange regime. So their policies had absolutely nothing to do with reduced crime rates. Nothing. Zero. They did the exact same thing with the economy. In fact, they did it twice. The regime took credit way back in 2016 for good economic numbers that they inherited from Obama. Just took full credit. And then the regime 2.0, they just lied. They claimed they inherited an inflation rate of over 9% and reduced it to 2.7%. When the truth was, Biden's high point on inflation, a little over 9%, peaked very early in his administration while he was trying to get a handle on things. He's the one who inherited a rising number. And if you look at that bar graph, you'll see the inflation rate drop rapidly from 9 plus down to the 2.7 that regime 2 actually inherited. And a year later, it was about the same, maybe even a little higher. And I don't mean to get off on this tangent, but it just illustrates how they lie. I hope by now you've learned not to believe one single word out of the mouth of anyone representing the regime, ever. I imagine once in a while they accidentally tell the truth, or maybe something's in their favor so they can tell the truth. But there's absolutely no point in ever assuming that they are telling the truth. The only reasonable response to their message is always to assume that they're lying. And not just any lie. Enormous lies. Lies that are 180 degrees opposite of the truth. So again, I didn't want to get off on any tangent. I'm still talking about Homan and ICE and mass deportations and all of that. That's where I want to keep my focus just for one more minute while I talk about so-called sanctuary cities. Here's the deal, in case you're confused. There's no such thing as a sanctuary city. It's not a legal term. It's just a term of art that people throw around. And the fascist definition of so-called sanctuary cities has had some success in public opinion. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but it's a majority of Americans, not a lot, but 50+%, oppose sanctuary policies. The propaganda is winning a little bit. All it means, and it varies between jurisdictions, different cities, counties, states have these policies. And generally all it means is that they don't require their police force to routinely ask about immigration status for the people that they interact with. whether they're witnesses to a crime or suspects, whoever. Jails who are holding or detaining people for one reason or another in a so-called sanctuary jurisdiction will not go out of their way to hold anyone longer than their normal release time so ICE can come and check them out or grab them. In other words, they're just not, by law, forcing their own cops and personnel to somehow be deputized as federal immigration agents. The most important aspect of so-called sanctuary policies is that any services that a city or county or state might provide, schools, health clinics, that they don't act as a threat against someone who might be undocumented. Now, the reasons are obvious. How are you going to have public safety when you have millions of people afraid to go to the hospital, afraid to cooperate with the police, maybe be a witness to a crime, afraid to avail themselves of their own constitutional rights because they fear engaging with the system? So it's a matter of public safety. That's the main reason for so-called sanctuary policies. And then also, it's just a matter of legal jurisdiction. Federal law enforcement cannot dictate to local and state law enforcement. That's not how the Constitution works. So I just felt the need to go over the basics in case you were at all confused. When Tom Homan and the Orange Menace and Caroline Leavitt or anybody in the regime starts spouting off about sanctuary status, first, as I said before, assume they're lying. But second, know that it's not what they say it is. It's not left-wing radical politicians who love criminals, especially if they're immigrants, and they hate everybody else. They hate you because you're white. They hate the regime because it's orange. Anyway, I just felt the need to talk about that a little bit. There was a pretty disturbing headline Friday morning about the economy that I feel the need to talk about. And I don't really want to, but I've got to talk about inflation again. Because you're being lied to again. The headline you probably saw was some big happy headline about how it fell. And I saw one headline, inflation falls to a 5-year low. And it just sounded so great. Until you just read a paragraph or two. First of all, you always have to be careful about which number you're looking at, because there are different numbers from different sources. And there's the core inflation rate, which somehow bizarrely excludes food prices, which is most people's greatest expense outside of housing, sometimes even more. So you don't have to dig very deep. And I'm not going to get deep into numbers. I'm not going to get boring. Economic talk can be very boring. But just some basics to understand about this number. Depending on the story you read, it's going to be 2.4 or 2.5%, down from 2.6%. Wow. Okay. Every time the inflation rate changes, whether big or small or up or down, there are a few sectors that are usually pushing the number. And in this case, it was gas prices and apartment rentals. Now, you may remember that after COVID, rental prices just went crazy. So at some point, there had to be some correction in that. And it was enough to push the overall number this time. Gas prices, regardless of what you hear from the lying regime, go up and down on a world global market, and it has absolutely nothing to do with U.S. policy. Even the Orange Menace, with all the power he thinks he has, can't really do anything at all about gas prices. Of course, he'll take credit. Of course. You and I have discussed at length how any president really can't take credit for most economic indicators, period. It's just too big. Markets across the world, supply chains, 180 nations all trying to fit into the puzzle. It's just too massive for government to regulate. So the economy is just going to do what it does most of the time. And it's especially true in the first year, maybe the first 18 months of any presidential administration. If their policies do have some impact on the economy, and I'm not saying they have no impact, at some point they do, at least some, But it's not going to happen in the first year. It just, things don't move that quickly. Now, in this case, there was some exception to that rule because a lot of economists warned that the very erratic and very high tariffs might show some immediate impact. If not immediate, very short term. Now, as they tell us, and let me be clear about something. I have no respect for economists or the so-called science of economics. I think most of it is voodoo. They're terrible at making predictions. They're terrible at analyzing and trying to explain the reasons why unexpected economic developments will suddenly take hold. These guys on cable television who yell into the camera, tell us what's hot and what's not and all of that, that's all just a joke. But here's what economists can do. They can look at today's raw numbers and they can explain basic raw numbers. So it's not forecasting, it's not predicting, it's not analysis. It's just like the weatherman sticking his head out the window, getting wet and telling us it's raining. Okay? So here's what an economist can tell us. Most retailers have eaten the tariffs so far. So we have not seen much impact on prices from the tariffs. They have no idea how long that's going to last because they're not soothsayers. They might try to tell you, but don't listen to them. Speaking of not listening, I hate to say this. I really, really do. But the source for Friday's headline of 2.4% or 2.5%, depending on whether you're looking at core or consumer price index, the source is the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. And this is what I hate to say. You can't trust anything from this administration. We are living under a fascist regime. Now, I used to get really annoyed at people who would be so cynical as to say, well, you can never trust anything the government says. I've never been that guy. There are plenty of those guys who've just said that as a blanket statement for forever. Well, you can't trust the government. In this case, looking coldly and logically at the behavior of this administration, I have now joined those guys. Anything coming from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, I don't trust. And my frustration and my anger are just as much or maybe even more focused on the media, who's telling us this story. Oh, it's good news. Wall Street reacted in such and such a way, and economists are happy, and oh. It's a difference of 0.1%. And as you and I have already discussed, the orange regime inherited an inflation rate of 2.7. So it's basically held steady. And then this brings me, I guess, to what really, really concerns me. Just do a quick thought experiment with me. Imagine if all of the bad things in the world were still happening just as they are today. All the things we're worried about. The fact that this entire regime, especially the shadow government of Miller and Vogt and the enablers in Congress, are just one big massive criminal enterprise, extorting billions of dollars from whatever domestic or international suckers they can get their hands on. Literally purchasing favorable headlines from national news media, pirating Venezuelan oil, the EPA committing ecocide, the HHS responsible for measles outbreaks, the obvious efforts for election rigging, white supremacy gone amok, secret police, Gestapo on the street, disappearing people, facilitating the genocide in Palestine, democracy destroyed. Okay, you got all that? Now here's the thought experiment. Imagine if the economy was just humming right along. You had a job that paid pretty well. You were able to pay for your mortgage, your rent, food, take a vacation once in a while. Your economic house is pretty much in order. All of those other bad things are still happening. All of them. Just like they are now. But financially, you're doing pretty good. And your neighbors are doing pretty good. And the rest, your siblings, your family, everybody in your circle is just rolling right along. Wages are up, costs are down. All the bad things remain, just as I described them. But your world, financially, is hunky-dory. how would you vote in the upcoming election? What would you tell a pollster if they asked you, is the country on the right track or the wrong track? Do you think the president's doing a good job or a bad job? Would you say you'd rate him as favorable or unfavorable? What do you think you would tell that pollster? How would you vote when you stepped into the booth? How do you think your family and friends would vote? What would they tell the pollster? See, this is very worrying to me. I lay awake and think about this because I'm afraid that the orange regime's approval ratings would be upside down. It would be 60% approval and 39% disapproval instead of the other way around. Please tell me I'm wrong about that. I don't think I am, but God, I want to be wrong about that. Come to the midterms, yeah, Republicans seem to be doing a pretty good job with the economy. James Carville told us, it's the economy, stupid. It's all voters care about. So the pundits tell us. They all tell us. Would we prove them right? Would we trade our civil liberties? Would we turn in our neighbors for deportation? Would we turn our back on bigotry and discrimination? You happy to give away your rights as a voter? Happy to see democracy wither away? Happy to see a regime in the style of Orban or Putin? Hey, as just the price you pay for a so-called good economy. Would we have no concern for the earth, for the planet, surviving another generation or two? Would all that just go away? Because, life's pretty good. Buy a new car, have Amazon deliver whatever I want in a matter of hours to my doorstep. Yeah, life's pretty good. You trade all the rest for that? So I'm forced into this really uncomfortable position that I have to root for a bad economy between now and the midterms? I have to be on the side of an unfair economy that leaves most people poor, or if not poor, a constant state of economic anxiety, which kind of defines America's middle class today. Those who claim to be or actually are middle class, many of them putting up a pretty good front. Yeah, you got the house, you got the car, you got the job, you also have the debt, and most of all, you have the instability. You have the anxiety. How any minute could be taken away from you. You got no guarantees. So, no, I don't want to root for a bad economy in order to lure people to my political positions. I would hope that they see the world as it is, and not just through the lens of their own comfort. Tell me I'm wrong. I really hope I'm wrong about this. All right, that's all I got for today. Thanks for listening. This and all episodes can be heard at the website charlesburcell.com or on your favorite podcast platform, thanks to our home station, River West Radio in Milwaukee. Follow us on Blue Sky and Substack. Peter Donalds wrote and performed our theme song. All right, I'm Charles Burcell. I love you. I'll see you out there.